Hello and welcome to game 96 from CCC 10's qualifying phase. This is a Catalan Opening played against Winter, and we can witness again Leela's zugzwangy squeezing techniques. It was a very nice game. The game started with d4, and after knight f6, c4 and e6, white has a lot of options. It can go into the nimzo with knight c3 or play the Catalan with g3, but in this one we have first knight f3, and now after d5 we reached the end of the book, and in this position, willingly and unforced by anything, Leela chose to play the Catalan with g3. And here black again has many options. He can play bishop e7 or bishop b4, or if it's feeling more ambitious and adventurous, then it can go to the main line with d takes on c4, winning a pawn. And here now Leela continued with bishop g2, and the idea is to pressure black's queen side on the long diagonal. And here again white can try to stick to the pawn with a6, c6 and b5, or play knight c6 or bishop b4 and so on. All these are good moves, but we have c5. This is also a playable move, and black's attacking this pawn on d4, which obviously can move forward because then the knight takes it, and d takes on c5 is not possible, of course, because then the queen takes on d1 and ruins white's short castling dreams. And now after bishop takes on c5, black would be even better. So here, instead of taking on c5, in view of knight c6 coming, putting again even more pressure on d4, Leela castled so that now her queen is defended by the rook, and after knight c6 she decided now to take on c5. And the main move here is to take the queen, and after the rook recaptures, take this pawn. And this has been played a couple of times before, but Winter here in this game chose to not take the queen on d1 and take the pawn on c5 directly, and allow Leela to take on d8. This is not unheard of, because queen takes and now knight takes on d8 has its points. It's not completely bonkers, because now this knight is defending the b7 pawn, and this allows now this bishop to come out and play, since now the b7 pawn is defended. And Leela now here played knight e5, but bishop d7. We have now knight d2, trying to take back on c4, and now since bishop c6 is not such a great idea for black, because white can take twice on c6, and this position is not good for black. There are two isolated pawns, and black has nothing to show for here. White just takes on c4, and black has no compensation for its ruined queenside structure. a7 may be hard to get to, but c6 is on an open file, and that spells trouble. So this is not something what black wants to play. So instead of bishop c6 we have bishop b5, and now Leela played a4, gaining a tempo on that bishop. And after bishop a6 we have now knight takes on c4 and knight d7. This knight on e5 is very powerful and very annoying for Winter, so he's trying to get rid of it. We now have bishop f4, and we can see that these bishops are exerting a lot of pressure on Winter's queenside here. It's very hard to deal with them. We now have knight takes on e5, but the other knight takes his place to annoy Winter, and now we have bishop d4 attacking this pawn on b2, so the knight returns to d3 to defend. And at this point Winter decided to get rid of the knight, and after e takes on d3 he could have taken here, but taking there loses time. It allows rook b1 with more pressure on b7. Eventually Winter took there, but first he castled, and now after bishop d6 and rook e8, and rook c1. He finally took on b2. But now this rook went to c7, exerting pressure on the horizontal. And Leela is slowly increasing the pressure on the queen side. We now have g6. Rook b1, the other rook attacks this bishop now. And after bishop g7, taking here on b7 would be possible, you know, gaining back a pawn. But it's not very good for white, because if you take this pawn, then black has rook b8, this annoying rook b8, putting the bishop into a pin. And it's not so easy to unpin, because you can't play just rook c1 or something, because black has 2 attacks on that bishop. And this rook on b1 is required to defend the bishop. So this would be very counterproductive for white. Taking on b7 is not good, but it's not needed either, because white has plenty of time to win back his pawn. It's much better to increase the pressure with moves like a5. And now the idea is to play a6 and take on b7 basically, because this pawn is pinned and can't take on a6. And you know, allowing a pawn to b7, that would be a terrible pawn mare for Winter. So that's a big no-no. So that's why Winter prevented that pawn to advance with a6. But now this structure is pretty much stuck here, and it's a target for white. b5 can never happen because a takes on b6, and allowing a passed pawn on the 6th rank would be just suicidal for black. And b7 eventually will have to fall. It's under a lot of pressure. So the game now continued with rook d7, because as mentioned, bishop b7 is not good yet because of rook b8 pinning that bishop. So rook d7 is now allowing this bishop to control the b8 square, and now bishop b7 would be possible. For example, if black would make a bad move here, let's say h5, then after bishop b7, black is in trouble. First of all, if the knight takes here, then this rook can take, exerting a lot of pressure on f7, g7, and so on. And the point is that now trying to challenge this rook by attacking it and also attacking this bishop on d6, trying to get a rook exchange, doesn't work. Because now the rook can take on f7, and after rook takes on d6, white can recapture his material with rook takes on g7 check. And of course this is completely winning for white with these two beasts on the 7th rank. So this doesn't work. The knight can take on b7, but what can then black do? Because this bishop is threatening to win an exchange. And there are some really funny lines here, which unfortunately for black don't work for him. For example, the rook can't go to these two squares because they're controlled by the bishops. And if the rook tries to go to a7, then white has these amazing moves, bishop c8, removing the bishop from the attack and also attacking this rook here on a7. And the whole point is that now if this rook takes, then the bishop recaptures, and now this rook is in trouble. It doesn't have squares, and white still wins an exchange. So this is quite amazing. And if now the rook avoids the exchange and goes to a8, let's say, then white has rook c7 defending the bishop and again threatening bishop d7 and winning the other rook. So this is quite amazing. These are quite interesting lines which don't work for black. So moving something like h5 would immediately win for white. So that's not possible. So what can black do then in order to save the b7 pawn? Well, Winter found an amazing move here again. Bishop d4. Removing the bishop from the 7th rank, and this now again stops bishop takes b7, because now after knight takes and rook takes, black would have rook d8, challenging the rook and the bishop, and now rook f7 doesn't work anymore, because after rook d6, black wins the piece. There's no rook takes on g7, the bishop has been removed from the 7th rank. This would be very good for black, of course, winning. So bishop takes on b7, not possible just yet. So Leela has to think of something else, and she came up with bishop c7, attacking this bishop. And Winter has to be very careful now again where to put this bishop, because black's position is very dangerous. For example, if bishop c3, then now bishop b7 works again, because after knight takes and rook takes, there's no rook d8, of course, because now this bishop is guarding these two squares where the rooks could be challenged, so that doesn't work. And if now the rook goes to f8 to defend f7, then white simply plays bishop b6, and white has a very good position. If the rook tries to challenge now this rook, then there's rook a7, and if rook a8, then now white has rook takes on f7 with a very cute threat of winning one of those rooks. I mean, actually, if this rook takes here, then white takes here and then picks up the a6 pawn and wins. And if the rook takes here, then a rook takes that way, and now the a6 pawn falls again and the a5 pawn rolls in. So white would win a pawn like this, and this is just quite simply not working for black. So bishop c3 is not good, but Winter found again the move that gives him, at least for now, equality. Played bishop f6, and now again bishop b7 doesn't work. Bishop b7 doesn't work because now again the knight takes, and after rook takes, Winter has this amazing rook e7 challenging the rooks now this way, defended by the bishop. And if now bishop b6, then rook takes, and even though white is still better, now the a6 pawn survives. There's no way to take it. So what can Leela do then? Well, she had to find again something else, and she came up with this very nice move, d4. And she's planning to advance this pawn to d5, and if allowed, even to d6, and somehow push this pawn to victory. And if after d5 the pawn takes, then after bishop takes on d5, and this bishop would now attack not only b7, but also f7. And the pressure would increase even more on black's position. So here now after d4, we have rook c8, and after d5, pawn takes, bishop takes, and pressure on those 2 points. And black is in a very big trouble here, because there are no really good moves here. You can't really challenge this rook with rook e7, because then you lose the knight with check. And something like knight e6 doesn't really work. White just plays bishop b6, and this pawn on b7 is still under attack, and at some point this bishop could pick up on b7, and then maybe the a6 pawn, and then the a pawn again rolls in. So instead of these moves, Winter played king g7, and now we have bishop b6, and you know, at this point Leela is much better, and she was expecting here g5, and then she intended to improve the position with king g2 and so on. But at this point, Winter played rook c2. And now the rooks are not coordinated well enough to challenge the rooks if they end up on the 7th rank. And also there is another move which comes with tempo for white now. So Leela decided to go into a winning endgame now with bishop takes on d8. And now after rook takes, she took on f7 with check. And now the move with tempo that I was talking about, bishop e4, removing the bishop from the attack with tempo by attacking this rook and threatening now rook b7. So what can Winter do? He cannot allow that, so he played rook b2 for going for a rook exchange. Leela takes the rook, there's nothing much else to do. Bishop takes, and now we have h4. Leela is taking away the g5 square from the king, and she's basically sowing here a mating net. And her plan is quite simple: advance those pawns and mate the black king. And here now we have rook d4 attacking this bishop, but f3 not only defends the bishop, but it's also it fits very nicely with Leela's plans of mating the black king, because now she's threatening g4 and g5 check, and after king h5 we can see that the g4 square now is taking away from the black king, and rook h7 just quite simply mates. So what can Winter do here? Well, he couldn't find something better than bishop c1, guarding the g5 square, and basically the bishop is planning to commit the major sacrifice by taking on g5. There's nothing better, unfortunately, here for black. So after g4 we have rook a4, at least taking a pawn, and after g5 check the bishop takes, pawn takes, king takes, rook takes on h7, and now after king f4 Leela made a very good move, rook h4. This is the best way of trying to get these pawns with a rook h4 check. And the point being that if now this king goes here, then Leela could play rook g4 attacking here, and now rook takes on a5 wouldn't be possible because of this skewer on g5. And if the king goes to g5 instead, then Leela will be able to pick up the g6 pawn with check, because king here runs into bishop g6 check, winning the rook. So, and after king h6, rook g6 comes with check, and white wins easily. So the king is kind of forced to e3, and now Leela played here king g2 to defend the f3 pawn and allow the bishop to take on b7. Taking the b7 pawn is much more important than taking the g6 pawn, because if this b7 pawn survives and white loses the a5 pawn, then these two connected passed pawns could cause a lot of trouble for white. So it's much better to take here on b7, and now this a6 pawn is not that strong, and the g6 pawn will fall anyway. And here now we have rook g5 check, but after rook g4 this rook exchange is not really helping black. But in order to save the a pawn, Winter now took on g4. We have f takes on g4 and now a5, and Leela played here bishop c6, stopping this pawn as soon as possible. And now after king f4 and king h3 and g5, white has a completely winning position, and the winning plan is very simple, although very hard to execute. This bishop has to stay for now on this diagonal and not allow this pawn on a5 to advance, and the white king has to come somehow to f5 to attack the g5 pawn and win it. Now this is easier said than done, because the black king of course won't allow the white king easy access to f5. And here now the game continued with bishop d7 defending this one, and now king f3 is the best move for black, not allowing this king to get out from this box. But white of course has a way of winning some ground with the king and getting out from this box. And the way to do it is now to play bishop a4, and after king f4 take away the f3 square from the king with bishop c6. And now with these two squares being taken away, the king has to step away from g3 and allow the king one step closer to the f5 pawn. So we have now, if king e3, then king g3, and so on. But in the game, after bishop d7, we have king e4 instead. So instead of king f3, we have king e4, which allows now Leela's king to go to g3, and king e3. And it's quite obvious that the black king will try to stay on these three squares and not allow the black king out of here. f4 is taken away by the black pawn. It's not easy to get out, but there is a way. And the way to do that is that here after bishop c6 and king e2, white needs to get into this position with the black king going to e2 when the bishop defends this pawn on g4. And then if the king goes back to e3, then so after king g2 and king e3, this king now could go to f1 and sneak over to the queen side and stop this pawn on a5. And this plan works because once the king gets to f1, he will be in time to stop the a pawn. So let's see how the game continued. We have here bishop e8, And now after king e3, bishop d7, defending this pawn. And now after king e2, we have king g2. And here now, if the king goes to e3, then king f1, winning some more space. King f3 now, of course, it just allows this king to get to the queen side. This one is defended by the bishop, so it doesn't really work. And if king d2 now, then king f2, keeping the opposition, and we try to get to f5 and win this pawn. So king d3, king f3, and now f5 has to be defended, so king d4. And now here actually it's a new move that is needed to win some more space. It's not so easy, but the idea is to take away these squares from the black king and force it away from the defense of e3 and allow the white king to get there. And the best way to do that is to play bishop f5. Now if the king moves, then we have king e3, and if a4, then we have bishop b1, and after a3 we can play now king e2, still trying to get to e3. And here now after king c3, king e3 is not yet available because then king b2 and a2 and black wins. First white needs to go to bishop a2, and after king d4, now the white king has d2 available, and after king e4 can go to c2 and pick up this pawn on a3. However, in the game after king g2 we had king d2, and this now allowed Leela to go to f3, and after king d3 again bishop f5 takes away some squares from the black king, and after king d4 we have now bishop e4 taking away even more squares, and now white's king will be able to get to e3. So Winter played here a4, he didn't want to move the king, but now after bishop b1, king d5, we have bishop c2. This is the fastest way to victory, force the pawn forward, and now we have king e3, and the point is that if a2, then bishop b3 wins this pawn, so the king went to c5, and now we have bishop b3, and after king b4, bishop g8, and now we can see that the black king is too far away from the g5 pawn, and Leela's king will get there and pick it up. King c3, king e4, king d2, king f5, king e3, and finally the g5 pawn falls, king d4, king f4, and now Gary will queen and win the game. Here now after a2 the bishop sacrifices himself, and there's no one stopping Gary to become a queen here. And now from here on it's really easy. You just have to restrict the black king to the first rank, and then just mate it. Another amazing game here by Leela, in which she squeezed until black's position became so bad, so difficult, that she could exchange down into winning endgame. Amazing win. Please subscribe, like and share, and check out some of the other games. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Bye bye.